regarding the violinist argument, I had a question regarding one of the responses I've seen you and many other people give about it, which is to pretty much say, like, your kidneys is not for the purpose of plugging into someone else and having their blood circulate through it. Your kidneys for you, but the uterus is for the child growing in the womb. It's for other bodies. I just had a question regarding like whether or not this response is sufficient enough to show abortion is impermissible, or even sufficient enough to properly refute the violinist argument. And the reason why I ask this is because it seems in a way to commit the appeal to nature fallacy, which is to say just because something has a purpose or is within nature doesn't necessarily make it right. Under the logic of the purpose of the uterus, would it then also be impermissible for a man to blind himself, or for him to cover his ears, or walk with his hands and write with his feet? So I'm just not entirely sure that the purpose of the uterus, this analogy, would be enough. Do you have any response to this?
In talking about the purpose of the uterus versus the purpose of a kidney, and the violinist analogy, for those who aren't familiar, is imagine you wake up one day plugged into an unconscious violinist, and the Society of Music Lovers is using your body to use your kidneys to filter his blood for 9 months to save his life. If you are allowed to unplug from him, why can't a pregnant woman, quote unquote, unplug from the unborn child in her womb? And in order to show this does not prove that abortion is permissible, you have to show the cases, the violinist and pregnancy, they are disanalogous. This is an argument by analogy, and you have to break down the analogy. The biggest one right off the bat that people notice, even many college students I speak to they only use this to defend abortion in the case of rape, because you'll say, okay, well, in the violinist example, you didn't choose to be signed up to that. It just kind of happened to you. But if you engage in an act where let's say you'll be plugged into the violinist, then it's just a totally different animal. So that would be one disanalogy. The other is the fact that unplugging from him, you're not causing him to die. You're just choosing to not save his life. Something else was already killing him, his kidney failure. But with abortion, the unborn child's perfectly healthy. So abortion does not fail to save the child. It takes a child who's already healthy and then starts the fatal sequence of events and kills the child. Difference between killing versus letting die. And then the last example, so a lot of this is by pointing out the disanalogy. No single point will get you the whole way there, but cumulatively, the goal. So here, it's interesting the way you framed it. I'm not talking about the purpose of the uterus in order to make a natural law argument for the wrongness of abortion. I'm merely saying that the argument a pro-choice person is using, the violinist analogy argument, does not succeed because there are too many disanalogous points. And one of them does relate to the purposes of the organs. Now, you did talk about the naturalistic fallacy. Just because something has a natural purpose doesn't mean you always have to allow that purpose to be carried out. A bacteria will naturally invade my body, but I'm allowed to repel them, for example. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do look at the natural uses of organs to determine morality. So, for example, what is the difference between what's the difference between amputation and disfigurement? What's the difference between medically justifiable amputation and just defacing and causing unjustified injury to the body? What is, in order to make the difference there, like you can cut off a gangrenous limb to save the body of a justifiable reason there for the whole body. Let me talk about the uterus. Like removing a cancerous uterus is justifiable for the goal of protecting the whole body. But removing a healthy uterus just because you don't want to get pregnant anymore, that is immoral because you're destroying something healthy without a justifiable reason for doing that. So you do take natural purposes into account. The reason that applies to abortion is to say, look, if someone requires assistance from me, do they have a natural right to that assistance? So we'd say, for example, that children have a greater right to assistance from their parents than from other people. In fact, this came up in my debate with David Boonin many years ago at Stanford. Boonin is probably one of the most famous academic defenders of abortion. His book is a classic on the subject. It's called The Defense of Abortion. And in the debate, I asked Boonin, suppose a woman, we have two women, right? One walks by in a field and discovers a child in the field abandoned. And another woman who is pregnant walks by let's say she becomes pregnant through rape, and she gives birth to a child in a field. Or I don't even think I included the rape question, but either way, she gives birth to a child, leaves the child in a field. Are both of those women equally morally responsible for the child? I think most people would say that the mother who gives birth in a field and the child is there has more of a responsibility to that child. That child has more of a natural right to that woman than the stranger who just happens to walk by. But the only way to explain that is because it's the child's mother. The child has a relationship there. So even if it was from the case of rape, there's still the biological connection, and the mother's body, the biological mother's body, is for that child. When we talk about children having a right to life, so for example, we talk about you and I having a right to life. That just means don't shoot me, don't poison me. If you leave me alone, you respect my right to life. If you leave an infant alone, you violate his right to life. So for an infant to have a right to life, an infant must have a natural right to another person to sustain him or her. So who would that be? What makes most sense would be the individuals that cause the infant or the fetus to come into existence. So I'm talking about this not so much about the use of the organ, like a natural law argument in that way, but rather as human beings, we have the natural right to care from others. Who is the primary beings that an infant has a natural right to? And that would be the parents. If a fetus has a right to shelter, if children have the right to shelter and food from their parents, then fetuses would have that right as well. And the uterus is the organ precisely to provide that to a child.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this Catholic Answer, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our live streams Monday through Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific. Or find the episode after on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, or our Catholic Answers app.